Hello, hello. Welcome once again to one of these conversations I've been having, the four parts of the mind, or just talking more about the mindfulness aspect of yoga that can often get forgotten about or not even thought of because, our modern approach to yoga, it is not bad and it is not good, but our modern approach, at least here in the West, has been to focus a lot on the physical body, and I love that. And I also want to emphasize the other parts of yoga. And so I'm kind of intuitively continuing the conversation when I feel the spark to teach this. And you can watch a bunch of the other conversations wherever you're watching this. There's a few others we've talked about. I kind of gave a rundown on the four parts of the mind was one of them. Another one was I talked about the manas part, the manas, which is often translated as just the mind, or that can often be as like the irrational mind. And I also gave another conversation or talk around the chitta, which is the unconscious part of our mind, or my favorite way to translate it is the storehouse of emotions. So that is that. And now, I am going to continue on explaining the other two, which is the ahankara and the buddhi. But I felt really called to perhaps do like a chitta 1.2 or like 2.0 to explain a little bit more about something that I briefly touched on in that other video, which was the impressions in our mind. And in yoga, we call those samskaras. And so these impressions live within our chitta, or that storehouse of emotions. That is what is, sorry, I have like a little thing in my throat. That is what is, that is like the storehouse of emotions, right? That is what's getting stored, are these impressions or samskaras. And let me back up a bit. So I'm looking down at my notes just to remind myself. Yes. So I want to explain a little bit more, or just like another analogy that was helpful for me to understand this too. So the chitta is like your hard drive, or like a hard drive. So it's like a big disk that stores things, right? And then the samskaras, or these impressions, are the file or the folder or the PDF that gets stored into this hard drive. And those files are often put in at a very early age. And samskaras, there are good impressions in our mind. There are, I guess to like label them a little, there are bad impressions in our mind. There's good impressions, there's bad impressions, there's mundane impressions. There's really all types of impressions in our mind, and most often those impressions are like, where it like doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter that was an impression, because it's like, it's so mundane, it's like brushing your teeth, that it's just there. But it's the impressions that get imprinted, that have a lot of emotion, or get a lot of that can happen in a traumatic state, are then what drives a lot of our triggers, and therefore a lot of our behavior. And it's amazing to me that this is part of Vedic philosophy, or the Vedas, or where yoga originated from so long ago. that a lot of what you do with a psychotherapist or in therapy is understanding your chitta, or what got stored in there at a very early age, because that chitta is unconscious. When you have a therapist, or when you are in conversation with a psychotherapist, you start to become aware of what you were once unaware of, which means you become aware of those impressions, or those files, or your samskaras. And something else that came to my mind was, and now it's not in my mind anymore, but another thought that I had was, in India, where yoga originated from, my teachers tell me that, back in the day, there weren't any psychotherapists per se, at least in the times of in India. And so people would go to the ashram to talk to a guru to get this type of information, because this information is in the old Vedic text, right? So super fascinating to me. I find that super cool that is like the OG psychotherapist in a way, or like the old school psychotherapist. And I'd be so curious to know like how that looked like in other times, right? In other philosophies or schools of thought, like Stoicism, or Greek philosophy. I'm just wondering, like, I guess I should do a little bit more research around that too. But back to our conversation around samskaras and, our unconscious mind, and how these things get stored and imprinted in us, right? And, something that my teacher said or explained to me, or was continuing to explain to me, was these impressions that happen at an early age. So let's say, for example, at a very young age, you're told, you're not beautiful, you're not smart, you're never going to be up to anything. That is an impression that is getting imprinted into your chitta, into your heart mind, and then that starts to become your personality and how you behave in the world. And so just think about that for a moment. Whether it's individualistically or on a collective level, what that type of, I'll just call them bad samskaras, what that type of bad samskara can do to a person and to a wide group of people as well. So yeah, that's pretty profound. That's pretty big, right? It can often look like it's our personality. It can often look like that's my personality, but that is simply an impression in my mind, a file that is stored that can get cleaned up and that can get reprogrammed. And that is often what you do in therapy, is to reprogram and to readjust things that were once maybe needed for your survival, for how things were functioning in your life, to now, whether you're a different person, you're an adult, or you're living a different life, that is no longer needed, right? And so, and I guess looking down at my notes, I wanted to also just make a note that, we're talking a lot about early childhood and like when these impressions get put in, and there's also in traditions in India and in the yoga tradition, there are rituals to create good samskaras. So I'm not familiar with all the rituals, and I just know from hearing my teachers, but it's kind of cool to hear that there are specific things that are done not only to children, but as you go throughout your journey of life, that there are different rituals to do to create those positive impressions in your mind. And that's also another way to think of when you sit down with your therapist, is creating new impressions, creating new samskaras, ones that are feeding you and supporting you. And impressions, impressions or samskaras can also be, if you do believe in past life, can come on from a past life. And so I don't want to get too far into that, because sometimes we can get attached to like, oh, this is just a past life thing, and it's being carried on for a bajillion types of lives. But just know that there are samskaras that we carry, if you do believe in that, that we carry from multiple lives. And I guess the way that I'm thinking of it is like, things don't necessarily get erased. And we are here in this lifetime to really support our soul, to get the lessons or the teachings or the positive impressions to continue on the next journey, or whatever journey you're on. I think really that's what I've got for our samskara talk today. There are several different characteristics, and I think the ones that I talked about, how it's kind of the source of our triggers, because they are imprinted at a young age generally. Those triggers are there because they're unconscious, and we think in a way that is normal. That is normal for us, right? Going back to that example of like, if you were getting imprinted at an early age that you are not beautiful, or you are not smart, or you're not worthy, then that is normal to you in some senses. It's unconscious to you that is a samskara. So you are kind of running around in the world with that kind of framework. And if there is an interaction where that samskara gets triggered, perhaps somebody makes a rude comment and it's just rude to be rude, but then that specific samskara gets triggered, that may then take you on an emotional roller coaster, or that may then take you through a downward spiral that may not have happened to someone else that doesn't have that specific samskara. So we each have our own samskaras, or impressions in our mind, based on our own lived experience. And I'll end it with kind of a cool, well, I think it's cool. I'll end it with kind of like a fun fact, if you will. Our samskaras are also the source of our dreams. And I'm still grappling around how to make sense of that. But essentially, when we are sleeping, these impressions and our experiences all start to get categorized, right? We're thinking of that hard drive, categorized in the Chitta. So they're all getting these various categories or processes or ways to get filtered in ourselves, which is why sleep is one of the reasons why sleep may be so important, aside from all of the health benefits. But we need that time to sleep in order to categorize the samskaras. And often dreams are the samskaras getting categorized. At least that's the way that my teachers are explaining to me too. And I found that pretty interesting. And a different way to think about the dream world, or a different way to start maybe observing your dreams. What could one of your dreams try to be interpreting one of your impressions, one of those deep impressions. So I hope that was helpful. The deep dive talk on samskaras, or how we get these emotional triggers in ourselves, and perhaps that can give us a bit more compassion, not only for ourselves, but to someone else too. That each one of us has our own impressions, each one of us has our own triggers, right? And, I might bring something up like, I have a bunch of spoons at home, and that might then trigger somebody's samskara unknowingly, and that could then put them in an emotional reaction to me or a conversation. So yeah, let me know if there's any questions or how that resonated with you or what your thoughts are. I'll come back and share another part of the mind, but like I said, I really wanted to do kind of a Chitta 2.0 to make sure that we're really grasping some of these profound and deeper teachings from Vedic psychology, a part of yoga that is often not talked about as much. And yeah, I'll be back. Thank you so much.